Hello, welcome to YA Thrillercon, and today we've got an interview with Megan Manzano. She is an agent, and I'm really excited to be chatting to her, asking her all sorts of questions about agenting, about her favourite thrillers, and any tips that she has for querying writers. So, firstly, thank you so much for joining me, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
Great, yeah. Would you like to start by sort of introducing yourself to viewers?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Megan Manzano, and I work as an agent at DeForio Literary. I represent middle grade, young adult, and adult literary fiction. Aside from that, for like my day job, I work in marketing, also in publishing actually, but for the academic side of things, so I'm kind of surrounded by it. But outside of like the publishing sphere, I tend to just really like hanging out with my dog and going hiking, playing video games, and watching a ton of television. So that's me in a nutshell.
Those sounds like all sorts of great things to do. So, what's your dog called?
Her name is Lady. She is like a hound mix, and she's like we adopted her like before COVID and everything, and like with like being home with her, she's very much enjoyed the extra attention. So
Oh, that's so cute. Back to agenting. Sorry, I always have to ask about a dog. If I hear someone's got a dog, I've just got to find out their name.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so what got you into agenting?
So how I got into agency was kind of an accident. I went to school for English, and I feel like the general kind of paths that you're told about when you go to school for English are either you're going to be a teacher or you're going to work in publishing, right? And I wanted to go like the publishing route, and I wanted to be like an editor and build my own list and all that stuff. But doing that the traditional way is kind of like takes a lot of time, and there are a lot of different things involved. And I like started out as an editorial assistant. So like I had that path for me. And then there was an agent at a couple of years ago who was doing like meet and greets sort of like in the city to talk about agenting. And I was like, oh, well, I don't really know a lot about this, so I'm going to just see what happens. And we wound up having about like a 2-3 hour conversation about agenting, and by the end of the conversation I was like, wow, I want to like be an agent. What I wound up doing was I wound up looking into like remote internships and stuff, and then I got one, and that's how I got started. But like agenting was nowhere near on my radar. I had no idea like the concept of agenting, because I feel like it gets left out. Like I was like, oh yeah, you just get books and they appear one day, but there's actually like a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I studied English at uni as well, and it's very much well, we were all kind of told that we would end up being teachers, so that was kind of the only pathway. And like thinking about it, you're totally right, because no one really sort of like mentioned much about like agenting or how you would become an agent to anyone on my course. So
yeah, and that was similar for mine too. Like it was, those were kind of the things that you did with your degree, and that's kind of it. So yeah, I feel like agenting's like this elusive mystery until you kind of figure it out yourself.
So how long have you been agenting at the moment?
Where am I at right now? I think like as like not an apprentice or not like an intern, I believe it's from November of 2019. So I'm like coming up on like 2 years, which is really, really exciting. But like if I factor in like interning and all that stuff, then it'd probably be closer to like summer of 2018. But I really didn't start building my own list until like that November 2019 period. So yeah, almost 2 years, which, wow, I said that out loud, and I was like, oh, wow, time has passed.
So what's it been like so far? Like, have there been any surprises, like things involved in the job that you wouldn't have expected?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just the waiting is something like, I know we're all told that, oh, things take time, you have to wait, but like, it really is a lot of waiting. And just like knowing how many, like if you like make a deal, right, like you could be sitting on that announcement for like a really long time, and that by the time it's announced it could have been like months in the making, which was like really shocking. And also like my first like full year of agenting was when we entered the pandemic, so I feel like I had an even like more hectic time, because everyone was adjusting to work from home. We didn't know what was going on, so I'm like, oh, happy agenting to me. And I mean, it's obviously affected everybody, but I was just like, this is one heck of a year to start really doing this, for a full year. So
Yeah, that's true. It does kind of like throw you in the deep end a bit with it. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Like every day something new is happening. Or I was talking to like some of my other agent friends and we were kind of having like, oh, well, this office is closed. These editors are working from home. This is happening. And we're just like, oh my goodness, like what is happening?
Yeah. Yeah, so you've mentioned a bit in your introduction about the books that you represent, like the different sort of like readerships. What about genres? Are there any particular genres that you really look out for?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a bit like across the board for everything. So for middle grade, I'm kind of like the most open for middle grade. Like, I love a lot of contemporary stories, especially if they're beginning to explore like your identity or kind of like, first crushes or first friendships. Like those are always really sweet, and I always really enjoy those. Or like when you're beginning to sort of understand like where you fit in the world. I really like middle grade fantasy. Like I think there's like so much magic that can happen in these books for kids. These big like fun adventures where you're like, with a bunch of like different animals or different like magic, and I think those are always a lot of fun. And yeah, so a little bit sci-fi as well. But and that can be kind of all over the place. Like I wouldn't mind like a good space adventure or something like that. It ties into the whole like kids going to save the world kind of thing, which I really enjoy. Especially if they're like it's like a group dynamic of friends. I love kind of seeing how all that ties together. But yeah, kind of from middle grade, I'm open to like almost anything. I think it's a really fun place to be right now in the market. For YA, it's a little bit more specific, but at the same time, I still have a lot of stuff. So anything contemporary is really good. Anything that explores like found family or like different types of like parent child relationships, that first relationship, your identity, all that good stuff. And for YA, I'm not into like I'm not looking for as much of like the high fantasy. I like more of the contemporary fantasy or like the light speculative stuff. Like every day where something weird happens is kind of where I'm at with that. And rom-coms of all kinds, love those. Something that's like feel good and you can read in a sitting and you're like, yes, this is what I wanted. And YA thrillers as well, which is why we're here. So definitely, I love like the old fashioned like bunch of people solving a mystery in a small town where weird things happen. Like literally can't go wrong with that. Or anything with like a bit of like a paranormal twist, whether it's some kind of ghost or some kind of like other sort of world happening. So yeah, that's kind of the overall for me for YA. And then for adult, I'm very specific with adult. I'm looking for like adult literary fiction, which is a very particular type of style. But for that, kind of open to almost anything. Like if it's contemporary or light speculative, similar dark academia, things set in schools. I'm really into all that stuff. So that's kind of, I think that's all of the genres for me.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's quite like a wide range.
Yeah, I get something different from everything, which is kind of what I enjoy about it.
Yeah, like it does give you a lot of variety, I guess. Yes, is there anything that you absolutely would not want to represent then in terms of genre?
Yeah, so I don't do historical fiction in any genre. That's just not something that vibes with me very much. And I don't do anything that's like super graphic horror in the sense of like demons or like possessions, things like that. Like that kind of like demon supernatural kind of other stuff like it creeps me out. I can't do it. But like bodily horror is totally fine. Like or like psychological horror, that's fine. And I don't do anything like below novels, so I don't do like chapter books or picture books or anything like that, and I don't do nonfiction.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, talking about YA thrillers, as this is YA Thriller Con, what are your favorite YA thrillers?
Oh boy. I really enjoyed. I mean, I think we could all say like One of Us is Lying, right? Because that's like the big book, right? I think that's like where kind of like YA thrillers were like, oh wow, look at this, right? But I really enjoyed People Like Us by Dana Mele. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, I've read that.
And yeah, it's set in a school murder. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what other one because you always ask me about books and I'm like, yeah, what books like have I read? Oh, of course, Sadie by Courtney Summers. Like I know that's like a bit blurry in the genre, but I feel like that was like a really cool use of like different mediums to create a mystery. So that was really cool. And I think those are the ones that come to my head most immediately. But I feel like I've read like a whole bunch of them. I'm just blanking on every title I know.
Yeah, that does happen to me. Like someone will ask me for recommendations and like
Mhm.
I'll just think, well, I know I've read loads of amazing ones, but I can't think what they're called. But
Right, exactly.
yeah.
Usually when people ask me that, I'll just be like, "Oh, I'll just literally like just go to like my list of like read books and be like, "Ah,
Yeah.
yes, here they are."
Yeah. So yeah, I did like Sadie, because I read that a few years ago now, and the
Hmm.
suspense in that novel just sort of blew me away because like it's kind of like more contemporary and dark contemporary than thriller, but it's definitely got
Hmm.
the suspense there. And yeah, with like the way that the podcast is sort of integrated, it's just so clever, like how it sort of like
Yeah.
mirrors the structure of like the different subplots. So yeah.
Exactly. Like it is definitely like on the darker contemporary side, but at the same time, you're still trying to figure out like what the
Yeah.
heck happened. And I think it was really cool because like you get more from the podcast and you get like a little bit more each time, and
Yeah.
then by the end, you're just like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
And
It
that's
was
always really
crazy.
awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, back to sort of like the agenting and querying side of things. What do you look out for in queries when you receive them?
Yeah. So I feel like this is a very like funny kind of answer, but I definitely just like look to make sure that like the query and synopsis and everything that I asked for is included. And I know that sounds like, querying 101, but unfortunately like not everyone follows guidelines. And I just want to say that like if you do, you're already like 10 steps above some others, which is unfortunately just like the way it goes. But in terms of like what I look for specifically in a query, so I'm really big on queries. I kind of like to be very intrigued right away from like the letter. So basically, I kind of look for, do I get a sense of like who this main character is? Do I know like what the inciting incident is? And like most importantly, like what the stakes are, right? Because I feel like what tends to happen is I get really general stakes, like if main character doesn't do this, then the world is going to end. Okay, and I'm like, all right, like that's a big stake, but like how is it specific to your main character? Like why does the main character care if the world is going to end, right? Because there are some characters who wouldn't care if the world is going to end, right? So I always say to make your stakes as specific as possible to your main character. Like what are they going to lose? What are they really kind of like afraid of? So that's kind of like my biggest thing for the letter. And of course, including all your metadata, like your title, your word count, your genre, your comp titles, all that's really great. And let's see what else. And mainly for like the pages of your query, like I really do look for like a really strong voice. So like I don't need to know everything about your main character, everything about your world, but I do like to get a sense from the beginning, like who your character is as a person. And obviously that's going to evolve and develop as things go on. But I want to just kind of read it and be like, okay, I see like this character is like really sassy or really angry or like has a lot of like, there's some kind of tension going on. So kind of just getting like the first glimpse of that is really important.
Yeah, definitely, because you kind of got to be sort of like hooked to want to read. So yeah, I was
Exactly.
wondering with like the query letters, how important would you say it is that authors include some biographical information?
I don't think it's as important as focusing on the story, in the main thing. So for me, like I say that like the best rule of thumb is you can do 2 to 3 sentences. If you have, previously published books or even just like short stories or anything like that, you can include like the most recent ones. So maybe within like the last 2, 3 years. You don't want to have like a whole list of them, because that's just taking up space. But yeah, you can do things like that. If you don't have previously published works, I know that people can get a little anxious about this because they're like, oh, I'm like behind. But that's not really the case. You can just not have them. That's fine. So normally what I say then is just to say like, what you do, what you do for work, if you feel comfortable, if you have some hobbies, if you're part of like, any kind of organizations, or if you have a really cool like profession, always love hearing about those, so like, you don't have to stress it. It can literally just be like 2 sentences about your life and then like you can move on from there. It's really like not, I know like it's, part of the query and you're stressed about it, but I promise it's like, it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be this big, biographical description of your life.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, talking about the sort of sample pages that writers include with their queries, Is there sort of like a set number of pages that you would definitely read before deciding whether you want to pass on the manuscript or request more pages?
Yeah, so it does kind of vary a little bit. From general queries, like my query form, I request 5 pages. And this may sound very scary, but I can usually tell within like the first paragraph or two if I'm like interested in something, and that comes from reading a lot. Like I've been doing agenting or like been in query boxes since 2018, so I've seen kind of like a whole array of things in that time. I also read a lot like for my own like pleasure reading and things like that. So I tend to know very quickly if I like something. And this isn't like a personal experience. Other agents also can tell very quickly. But if I do something from like a contest or something like that, I think I usually request like 30 pages, and I can kind of like go through that and kind of see if we're starting to build in the right direction. So like, am I getting a sense of like what the conflict is? Does the character or characters, if there are multiple point of views, like have their own personality? Do they have like different goals that they want to achieve? So it's kind of like that. And I tend to request like materials and stages. So like if I like something, I'll start with like a partial, which is like 30 to 50, because at that point I start to see if like the story is able to like hold its own, or if it's starting to like, if there are like bigger problems that, you know, may not just not work for me. And then usually if I read the partial and I really like it, I'll just go straight to the full, because one, I can stop reading at any time if I don't want to. Two, like if I'm really into it, I hate waiting. So I just want to have it ready to go. So if I want to read it all in one sitting and I have time, I'm going to do it. But yeah, so those are the kind of the stages that I request, and agents have their own ways of doing it, but that's just kind of what's worked for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, like roughly how many queries would you receive sort of each month?
It really does vary by month, but I can get anywhere from like 400 to 600 a month.
Wow, so that's quite a lot. So.
Yeah, and for other agents, it can be like well upwards of that. So a lot.
So yeah, because obviously you've got your own clients as well who you're going to be sort of working with and representing. So like, would you be able to talk me through sort of like a typical day in the life of like an agent, sort of like how much time you'd spend on like looking for new writers through sort of like your queries in your inbox, and sort of the other sort of things and like aspects of the job that sort of writers might not be aware of?
Yeah, so for me, it's a bit on the slower side because I'm still building my list and I'm still like working on selling stuff. So it's going to definitely look different for everybody and for agents who are a bit more established. But for me, the first thing I tend to do is I tend to check my email because I feel like the morning is when I have the most energy to like get through like the log, right, the task log, and then usually like after that, when I've had like breakfast and coffee and stuff, is when I usually start reading. So whether that's like my client's own manuscript that I have to work on, or like something I've had in my query box, like that sort of depends. I'm a pretty fast reader, so like that kind of helps me. I get through like large chunks usually in one sitting. So and queries kind of happen throughout the day for me. Like usually if I have like downtime, I'll kind of be like, oh, let me just go through the query box and I can get through like 20 or 30 of them in like one sitting, especially if like they're just not working for me. But I feel like my day like definitely kind of varies, because if I get like an offer in, or if I get like, if I'm talking with an editor, like I could just have to like drop stuff to go like to that email and just kind of go back and forth for a while. So it does definitely look different, I think, almost every single day. And I tend to just kind of like plan out what I need to do. So like obviously if I have client work, like that's going to come first. So like I'll be like, okay, I need to edit 50 pages of this morning, and then I can go back to like doing something else. And like most of the time you have more than one manuscript from your clients because they all send to you at the same time. And it's literally a thing. Like for the current year, I had manuscripts like since January. And then I had like a nice little 2-week break, and then I got 2 more. So that's like partly what led to like me closing to queries like for most of the summer, because I'm like, I want to get all of this like done and sorted. And like my list is not like a super huge list, but I have a lot of really talented writers and I'm really excited about them. But I still have things I want to fill. So like what I've been doing right now is I've been doing a little bit of like pitch contests like in between while I'm closed, and I'll probably wind up opening back in the fall. It's very like how much is on my plate right now and how much I want to like continue to build my list. So it varies a lot. I think like what writers may not like quite grasp is like how much is happening behind the scenes and like how much is like time management between all the things you need to do and all the things you want to do. So, and like most agents do have like a full-time job like I do. So it's like slotting it in with all the other stuff. So yeah, it's a lot. I don't know if that was very helpful, but I just kind of rambled.
No, it's always interesting hearing about sort of like the other aspects of like the publishing industry that writers don't really come across, because it gives us an appreciation for the just like the vast amount of work that you do for us all. So yeah, just like hearing about it is just like really helpful as well. But yeah, so have you got any sort of specific tips for any writers who are thinking about querying you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're querying me specifically, I would just say, you know, like everything that you need is literally in my form to query me. Like, I really want, like, when I say, like, you know, your query and synopsis in your pages, I mean all of those things. And the query and the synopsis are two different things. I feel like some writers, like, don't quite, like, know that. So, like, the query letter is kind of like the hook of your book, I would say. And then the synopsis is, like, all those plot details that you really hate writing out into 2 pages, but you have to do it anyways. And I mean, for like my form specifically, like I have a whole list of resources in the form itself. So if you're like querying, you're like, what does all this mean? I have all those answers for you in a nice little section above my form. So you don't even have to Google anything. You can just like copy paste. But yeah, I mean, I think really like it is like a general advice is just like really kind of like do the dive into like who you're querying, you know, like do your wish list like match up entirely with like what you're writing? Do you feel like the agent's the best fit for you? Like, I know some people want like traditional big 5 deals, you know, or big 4 publisher now, you know, and like, that's a completely valid goal to want. But if you see an agent who maybe has only sold to like smaller presses, like maybe they're not the right fit for you. Or if you want the opposite, where you want kind of like a more medium-sized or small press career, but then an agent only sold to like these big sales, you know, that's something to take into consideration as well. If you do wind up getting a call with an agent, like I can't stress enough to ask about like their editorial style and their communication style, because everybody is very different and everybody has different needs and expectations. And if you go in without knowing any of those things, or you just assume that like an agent will work for you, that's really not what you should assume, because unfortunately, like you can have a very miserable experience because you guys weren't on the same page. So yeah, I really just think like, for querying, like, you know, read all of the agent's instructions, kind of know you got everything covered. And then when it comes to like the actual agent interaction, like you have to make sure they're a fit for you. Because at the end of the day, like agents are working for you and representing your work. And it's a really miserable situation if you don't feel like you can talk to your agent, or you're like heard by your agent. And that's like an entirely separate issue from like smagents. But this is just my general advice for like legitimate agents right now.
Yeah, that's such a valid point as well. So yeah, when someone's writing a query letter, how important would you say it is for them to personalize it to the agent that they are querying?
I mean, I'd say it's like 50-50, right? Like, I feel like if you like met an agent, say at like a conference or like a workshop, I think it's always good to be like, you know, we met at this workshop. You said you want to see this. Like, you know, you thought it'd be a good fit because of like X, Y, and Z, right? Like very simple 2 sentences probably, right? Or if you like, you know, read an agent's like manuscript wish list and you're like, oh wow, we like so many of the same things, and like my book like mirrors all these books, like you could be like, hey, I think you're really, you know, I think my book will fit all of these different things. Or like, you know, I've seen, or maybe even if like the agent did like a talk that you really appreciated, like you can do that. But if you're just querying the agent because they fit your genre and you don't really have like anything special to say, you can just jump right into the query. There really is like, there's no expectation for personalization, you know? And I feel like some writers might think that they have to, but it's really just okay to just go for it and just be like, I'm querying you this book because this is what you represent. Here's my, you know what I mean? Like obviously more formal than that, but like you don't need to stress that the personalization is going to be like the end all thing. Like agents know that like you want to get an agent to get like the book deal right, and like we know that you're querying us because ideally we fit your book. Like it's fine. You don't need to worry about that much.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure that would be very reassuring for some writers to hear.
Yeah.
So we're coming up to the end of the interview now. So is there anything else that you would specifically like to say at this point?
I think we really covered like a good range of stuff. So I'm pretty like okay, unless you have any other questions.
No, we've sort of, well, like you say, we've covered pretty much everything that we'd like planned to talk about. So
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us for YA for a Look On.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you.